Reading a breaking legal news story is, well, it's a lot like watching a stage magician.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you see the flash, in this case, this massive $6 million verdict against Meta and Google for social media addiction. But you totally miss the sleight of hand.
You miss the actual trick.
Right. So today, we aren't just looking at the final verdict. We are acting as your personal English educators for this deep dive. We're taking you behind the curtain to dissect the precise, the linguistic traps, and the courtroom rhetoric both sides built to win over the jury.
Because in a courtroom, and the calculated press releases that come afterwards aren't just tools for communication. They are architecture. I mean, lawyers and PR teams use highly specific English phrasing to construct this alternate reality for the jury and the public.
Yeah, if you were just skimming the headlines to see who won, you're only seeing the illusion.
Exactly. To actually understand how the modern internet is being put on trial, you have to decode the language of power. We are going to extract the crucial vocabulary, analyze the phrasing, and really help you confidently parse these complex news segments.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a deeply consequential BBC News report about a recent Los Angeles court ruling.
A huge one.
Yeah, two tech titans. Meta, which obviously owns Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, and Google, which owns YouTube. They were sued by a 20-year-old plaintiff named Kay, who chose to remain anonymous.
Right, and we should define plaintiff here for you listening. In English legal terms, the plaintiff is simply the person bringing the case to court, the one making the accusation.
Exactly, and the media immediately branded this a landmark case, which is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot in the news.
It really does.
But a true landmark case isn't just a high-profile trial, right? It's like a sports referee finally blowing the whistle and calling a foul on a controversial play that athletes have been getting away with for a decade. It fundamentally changes how the game will be played from now on.
What's fascinating here is that distinction. A normal trial just applies existing rules to a specific conflict. But a landmark case actually rewrites the underlying code of what is legally permissible.
It sets a precedent.
Exactly. Once a jury establishes that new precedent, like deciding a social media algorithm can be legally categorized as a defective product, every other lawyer in the country can download that exact same legal logic to sue a different tech company.
It just opens the floodgates.
It really does.
So let's look at the verdict, which is the formal decision made by the court. The outcome here was that these companies were found liable and ordered to pay damages. And damages is the English legal vocabulary for money awarded in compensation. In this case, around $6 million.
Though we should note, Google and Meta definitely plan to appeal, meaning they will ask a higher court to reverse the decision.
Right, of course they will. But I want to pause on that phrase, found liable. Does the term found liable imply malicious intent? Like, did they do this on purpose, or does it just mean their product caused an accident?
Dad, it's a great question. So you have to remember, this is a civil court, not a criminal court.
Okay.
In a criminal trial, you're fighting over the word guilty, which usually implies malicious intent or breaking a specific penal law. But liability, being found liable, is entirely about financial responsibility for harm caused by your product.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so keeping the damages relatively low, like $6 million instead of $6 billion, was strategic. The money isn't the point. Pinning the label of liability on the core functionality of social media, that's the real victory here.
That makes perfect sense. So let's look at the specific language the plaintiffs used to force that liability. Because, I mean, they couldn't just walk into a courtroom and say, the app makes teenagers sad.
No, the judge would throw that right out.
Right. They had to prove a mechanical failure. And they anchored their entire case on a very specific two-word phrase, which was addictive design.
Yes.
They argued that Kay didn't just casually use these apps, she became hooked, which is a great colloquial English word for being strongly addicted or intensely attracted to something because of the platform's very design.
And look at how the plaintiff's lawyers weaponize the tech industry's own vocabulary against them.
Whoa, how so?
Well, for years, Silicon Valley has boasted about creating a frictionless or seamless user experience.
Yeah.
But the plaintiffs took those exact same features and relabeled them as an addictive design. They fundamentally changed the narrative from user convenience to user subjugation.
Right, let's drill down into the mechanisms they targeted. The big ones were auto-scrolling, which is automatically moving content down a screen, and algorithmic recommendations, which is when the app suggests content based on your data to keep you engaged.
The lifeblood of modern apps.
Exactly. But let me push back on this phrasing for a second. Is auto-scrolling really a malicious, addictive design? Or is that just the tech industry's standard vocabulary for a seamless user experience? Like, how does using the word hooked completely change the narrative from user choice to victimhood?
It changes everything because it focuses on the removal of what behavioral psychologists call stopping cues.
Stopping cues.
Yeah. In traditional media like reading a physical book or clicking through pages on an old website, getting to the end of a page engages your brain's executive function. You have to consciously decide, do I turn the page or do I click next?
Oh, right. You have to take an action.
Exactly. Auto-scrolling completely bypasses that executive function. It removes the natural pause, trapping the brain in a passive dopamine loop. It literally feeds you the next stimulus before you even have a chance to evaluate if you want it.
Wow. So by branding auto-scrolling as an addictive design, the lawyers are completely stripping the user of agency. You aren't making a choice to scroll for 4 hours. You are the victim of a machine meticulously engineered to trap your attention.
Precisely. They successfully changed the definition of the app from a tool to a trap. And that shift in agency is everything in a civil trial. If it's a tool, the user is responsible for how they use it. If it's a trap, the manufacturer is liable for the damage.
And the families of the victims amplified this trap narrative brilliantly outside the courtroom, too. They accused the tech giants of manipulating our children for profits, while parents were just trying to keep their families safe.
Notice the rhetorical contrast.
Right, manipulating implies this dark, hidden control by a massive corporation, which perfectly contrasts with the image of everyday parents just trying to protect their kids.
It establishes a pristine hero and villain dynamic for the media.
It really does. Which brings us to a stark, devastating piece of phrasing delivered by the parents. The BBC report highlighted a British mother named Ellen Room who tragically lost her son to a YouTube challenge. She emphasized that this is a global problem, not just an isolated thing.
Yeah, it's happening everywhere.
And she delivered a very specific, powerful phrase to big tech executives. She said, "Stop blaming the parents. It's on you."
It's on you. That is such a crucial piece of English phrasing for you to learn.
Yeah, it's incredibly strong.
It's a colloquial way to assign total responsibility. It's a direct, accusatory transfer of guilt that completely rejects the tech industry's favorite defense, which is always, well, parents need to do a better job of monitoring screen time. It's on you, echoes the legal phrase, be found liable for, but in everyday, visceral language.
So every courtroom has two sides, and we want to impartially examine how both sides construct their reality. If the plaintiffs are using aggressive emotional English to assign direct blame with, "It's on you," how does big tech fight back?
Well, they use a completely different style of English.
Right. How do they use sophisticated language to defend themselves and deny a connection?
When you are defending against a highly emotional, narrative-driven accusation, your most effective linguistic weapon is the language of clinical detachment. You want to make the situation appear far too tangled for simple blame.
Ah, okay.
So Meta's official PR response stated that teen mental health is, and I quote, profoundly complex and cannot be linked to a single app.
Profoundly complex. That is a masterful piece of deflection terminology.
It really is.
By calling the issue profoundly complex, Meta isn't denying that the teenager is suffering. I mean, that would make them look incredibly callous.
Right, they validate the pain.
They validate it, but they argue that the web of real-world causes like school stress, post-pandemic isolation, family dynamics is just so thick that it is scientifically impossible to point the finger at one specific logo on a smartphone screen.
Precisely. In civil court, the burden of proof is on the plaintiff to draw a straight, unbroken line from the product to the harm. The defense doesn't have to prove their product is completely harmless.
They just have to muddy the waters.
Exactly. They just have to throw enough other contributing factors into the mix to make that straight line look like a tangled mess.
And to tangle that line even further, Meta deployed a very specific verb. They claimed that the challenges the plaintiff faced in her life preceded her use of online apps, meaning to happen before.
Yes, precede. A classic linguistic tool to cut off the chain of cause and effect.
So what does this all mean? It's exactly like a fast food company saying, our burgers didn't cause the heart attack, the person's lack of exercise preceded eating here. It's an attempt to completely rewrite the timeline of causality.
It's a sterile chronological defense against a messy emotional attack. If the pain preceded the product, The product cannot be the catalyst.
Right. And we saw this exact same meticulous word choice from Mark Zuckerberg himself. During his defense, he conceded, "We are not perfect." But when he was presented with the fact that Kay spent up to 16 hours a day on social media, Zuckerberg called it problematic.
But he explicitly refused to call it an addiction.
Exactly. He refused to use the word addiction. Why is that distinction so important?
That distinction is the entire ballgame. Problematic is a behavioral term. It suggests the user has a problem managing their time. It keeps the locus of control, and therefore the legal liability, squarely on the teenager's shoulders.
So if he slips up and says the word addiction, he's essentially admitting that his product has a medical mechanism that overrides human free will.
Exactly. Addiction implies a physiological hijacking. If a CEO admits their product causes addiction, they're admitting it functions like a drug.
Which immediately opens them up to a whole new tier of regulatory oversight.
Exactly. And Google took a similar path. They just flatly denied that their apps are designed to harm. But examining this vocabulary shows exactly how they build their legal defenses. A flat denial paired with terms like profoundly complex and problematic.
Okay, so we've decoded the vocabulary of the verdict and the linguistic tug-of-war between the two sides. The plaintiff screaming, "It's on you," and the defense calmly insisting it's profoundly complex. Now we need to look at the terminology experts are using to describe the future impact of this case.
This is where the media context comes in.
Right. The BBC used a very specific, culturally loaded metaphor here. They called this big tech's big tobacco moment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that metaphor is huge in English media. It implies a total paradigm shift.
Explain that for our listeners. What does that cultural reference actually mean?
Well, decades ago, the tobacco industry was culturally untouchable. Smoking was framed as a lifestyle choice, a personal freedom. But eventually, relentless litigation exposed how the product was engineered to hook users.
And we know how that worked out.
Right. The narrative shifted from lifestyle choice to inherently dangerous addictive substance, which led to massive regulations. By calling this a big tobacco moment, the media is signaling that social media is facing that exact same reckoning.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We have to discuss the ramifications, which is a great vocabulary word for the complex consequences of an action or event. What are the potential future changes discussed in the sources?
They're pretty staggering. We might see the forced removal of auto-scrolling entirely, the implementation of mandatory health warnings on screens, restrictions on advertising, or even making social media strictly an over 16 or over 18 experience.
And there's real-world context for this right now. The UK House of Lords is currently debating a potential ban for under 16s. And after this Los Angeles verdict, that debate might get a much warmer reception, right?
Absolutely. The verdict gives politicians the legal vocabulary they need to justify aggressive action.
But wait, if they are legally forced to remove algorithmic recommendations and auto-scrolling because courts decided they are actionable, addictive designs, does social media even exist as we know it anymore, or does it just revert to being a static digital address book?
That is the existential threat facing big tech. Their business model relies on keeping you hooked. If those tools are banned, the foundation of their enterprise collapses.
It would completely rewrite the internet. So to wrap up our deep dive today, we covered a massive news story by acting as your language educators. We broke down the $6 million verdict against Meta and Google.
We learned essential legal vocabulary like landmark case, damages, and plaintiff.
We analyzed how plaintiffs assign blame with phrases like, "it's on you," and saw how tech companies use words like precede and profoundly complex to deny connection.
And we explored the difference between a behavior being problematic versus an addiction.
Exactly. But we want to leave you with a final unaddressed question to mull over on your own that builds on these sources.
It's a big one.
If courts are now deciding that algorithmic recommendations and auto-scrolling are legally actionable, addictive designs, could this vocabulary eventually be used to sue other digital industries?
Oh, that's a fascinating thought.
Right. What happens when this exact same legal phrasing is turned against video game developers, or streaming services like Netflix that autoplay the next episode, or even online shopping platforms that use algorithms to keep us hooked? Who is next on the chopping block?
It's entirely possible we see those lawsuits soon.
So thank you for joining this language and news breakdown. And encourage yourself to listen closely to the specific words used the next time you read a headline. The magic trick is happening right in front of you.
喜欢这种学习方式，欢迎订阅我的频道，让我们一起用下一个10分钟把商业英文变简单。